It's an honor to be here. I wanted to begin by saying that I've been interested in Cuba for a long time. We have an employee named Brett Perlmutter, who's here, who's really one of the heroes of the company, who, working with a team, has figured out how we engage in Cuba. And Google's position is that we want Cuba to be as successful and connected as possible, and we've done our part. And I went to Cuba 2.5 years ago, and then more recently in December, so my second visit, during which time I met with Dr. Leal, who's the historian of the country. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about Cuba here with people who are interested, but also to honor your service and commitment to your country. So your background, probably the most significant historian in the country, officially has the title of the historian of Havana, but if you've been to Havana, you know that it is the cultural center of the country. And I thought we should start by asking you about José Martí and why he's so important and why you're here in New York.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Ante todo, es un honor para mí grande poder encontrar nuevamente. Me alegro de que sea aquí, en su sede de Nueva York, por cierto, muy hermosa, muy interesante y muy inspiradora para mí.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for welcoming here, specifically to the headquarters here in New York City, which, by the way, is absolutely beautiful and inspiring.
Estoy en Nueva York tras de una idea romántica, si se quiere. Hace casi 20 años, cuando hice mi primera visita, encontré en el Parque Central la escultura de José Martí. Pocos años antes había sido inaugurada.
I'm actually in New York on, if you will, what is a romantic visit of sorts. 20 years ago, I came to New York, and I found myself in Central Park, and I found a beautiful sculpture of José Martí.
Fue la obra de una gran escultora norteamericana que ya a una edad muy madura acometió el proyecto de hacer esa escultura muy especial, muy diferente a todas las que yo he visto en el mundo. No solamente ya para Martí, sino para cualquier otro líder, poeta u hombre que haya tenido una trascendencia en la historia humana.
It was actually put together or created by an artist, an American artist, who was a bit avant-garde in her creation because of the fact that no other sculpture of its type had ever been seen of a poet, historian, or statesman, and it drew my attention.
La artista Anne Haidt Huntington estudió profundamente la Escuela Italiana de Esculturas y estudió la personalidad de Martí y logró plasmarla en un monumento diferente.
Huntington, who was the author, studied the Italian School of Culture, and she was able to take the idea or personality behind Martí and really hone in on his personality to create this work of art.
Además, desarrolló una tecnología, experimentó con una tecnología que desafía bastante las leyes que hasta ese momento están vigentes para la escultura monumental.
And of course, the type of technology that she used in creating this went against every kind of school of thought at that time in the creation of this monument.
Ahí surgió mi idea de lograr cómo hacer una copia fiel de esa escultura, venciendo todas las dificultades que existirían para lograrlo. Y a lo largo de después de transcurrido todas esas últimas 2 décadas, estoy muy cerca de lograr el sueño de hacer una copia para Cuba y para La Habana, la ciudad donde una vez nació José Martí, que vivió en Nueva York 15 años, más del tiempo que él vivió en Cuba, un tiempo consciente, lo vivió en esta gran ciudad, donde experimentó el conocimiento de la cultura, el acercamiento a los grandes fenómenos de la tecnología y el arte de su tiempo.
And of course, an idea came to mind at that time, which was to create a work of art that was similar to the same sculpture that I had seen in Central Park. This was an idea that, of course, took 2 decades in the making. And at the moment, I'm actually very close to coming to fruition with that idea. And of course, the idea of creating a copy of this is also to create the same type of sensitivity and genius that this artist used in honing in on the life of Martí here in New York City, who actually, he lived 15 years here in New York, more time here than he did in Cuba, and he experimented with culture and all of the American know-how at that time. So of course now at this point I'm trying to see what I can do to bring that same type of appeal that is found in this work of art to the city of Havana that saw Martí be born in Cuba.
It's interesting that in Cuba, there are no statues of Fidel Castro, and yet there is a great reverence for both Fidel and José Martí. Why is it that there are no effigies of Fidel, but you're very focused on Martí?
Él se negó rotundamente a todo culto a la personalidad y antes de morir dispuso que por ley se prohibiera toda forma de culto a la personalidad, ni plazas, ni monumentos, ni nombres de calles, ni nombres de instituciones. Con eso preserva lo más importante a mi juicio de su personalidad, que es su idea, su concepción del mundo, su visión del mundo, era más importante que matarlo en monumentos y en estatuas. Usted diría que mis palabras pueden estar reñidas un poco con lo que quiero hacer con Martí, pero es que Fidel siempre tuvo como referente a Martí, su idea, su apasionante idea de América, de lo que él llamó Nuestra América, su apasionante idea sobre que un mundo mejor era posible.
He was completely against any sort of cult of personality, anything that involved creating monuments or statues or plazas or institutions. He was completely in tune with the idea that Martí tried to leave for the world, which was to create a better world. Fidel himself knew that Martí believed in this, and it was emblematic. You would probably say that my words are a bit contradictory in what Fidel wanted, but in essence, his passion will also be part of this statue, and it's also the America that Martí wanted to create, our America.
So Google has also helped with Martí by building a virtual reality demonstration that we have showed off for using our VR goggles. And so I'd like to understand a little bit more about the history of Havana and its preservation. You were heavily involved in making Havana become a UNESCO World Site and preventing its development. Was that your idea? Was that Fidel's idea? How did it really work?
Primero debo agradecerle mucho a Google por el documental que se ha hecho en realidad virtual, que yo creo que va a tener una gran significación porque está contado como quien narra una historia al pie del fuego, junto al fuego, a unos niños que están reunidos en un aula escolar. Con relación a lo segundo, me siento muy comprometido con la restauración del centro histórico de La Habana y ante mí hay una precedencia de intelectuales y de personalidades que en su tiempo quisieron preservar el carácter histórico y monumental de la ciudad.
First of all, I'd like to thank Google for the creation of the goggles, where children are able to sort of witness the history that's been played out in Havana for a very long time. It's almost as if their feet have been held to the fire, so to speak, so that they can actually witness everything that's happening in real time. And secondly, the restoration of the Cuban Civic Center for History, which has now seen a renaissance in what is the new history that will be created in Cuba.
Había que responder un poco a esa antigua afirmación casi clásica en la lengua española, en la literatura española, de que todo tiempo pasado fue mejor. lo que yo llegué a pensar es que no se puede ir al futuro sino desde el pasado. Esa es mi convicción.
Of course, in keeping with the tradition of Spanish literature, which is always to look back into the past and sort of look at everything romantically and think that the past is always better than the present or even the future, this sort of seemed to be the proper setting for the narration of this film. And of course, this would be the best link for the past to the future.
Pero al principio la idea no era muy comprendida. Yo recuerdo que en esos tiempos que llamo heroicos, hace 4 décadas, andaba por las calles recogiendo cosas y llevándolas al lugar que yo consideraba que iba a ser el punto de partida de un gran proyecto.
Of course, this idea was never really understood, and I'd like to harken back to what I'd like to call heroic times about 4 decades ago, where I was walking through the streets and collecting all sorts of information to then be able to recount all of this and use this as a point of departure for this kind of film or project.
Encontré algunos obreros fieles y personas que me acompañaron en esa aventura.
Of course, I then found faithful workers who accompanied me on this task or adventure, if you will.
Mi carro tenía solamente 2 ruedas.
My car only had 2 wheels.
Mm-hmm.
Y me contaron que Alejo Carpentier, el gran escritor de las letras americanas, me contaron que él me vio en esa época. Era muy delgado, mucho más que ahora, joven, iba con mi carga de piedras. Y entonces él dijo, ¿quién es esa persona? Y le respondieron, es un muchacho, un joven que está empeñado en algo imposible, etc. Y entonces él respondió, con ese carro llegará lejos. Fue como una profecía para mí. Ahora que lo sé, lo comprendo.
And of course, at that time, Alejo Carpentier, one of the contributors to the American Letters, saw this very thin, frail young boy walking down the streets with a load of rocks, and he asked, "Who is this boy?" And someone said, "Someone who's actually chasing an impossible dream." And he said, "He will probably make it. He will probably get very far with that 2-wheeled cart." And it's actually prophetic on his part that he actually said that.
Entonces mi trabajo se convirtió en una pequeña república griega.
At that point, my work actually became a sort of Greek republic, if you will.
Como había necesidad de casi todo, pues tenía que construir el arco y la flecha. Tenía que hacer todas las cosas.
Since I had to create everything from its inception, it's as though I had to create both the bow and arrow at that point.
Y entonces un día Fidel vino con una delegación de Chile y vino a La Habana Vieja y se encontró conmigo, del cual ya le habían hablado algo.
And of course, at that point, Fidel came to me with a delegation from Chile. He came to Old Havana, and apparently someone had mentioned what I was trying to do.
Cuando él terminó su recorrido me preguntó, ¿qué necesitas? Y le dije, nada, se sorprendió. ¿Y por qué? Le dije, porque si yo empiezo a pedirle a usted, no volverá.
And of course, he then asked me, "What is it that you need?" This was after he had finished his tour. And I said, "Absolutely nothing."
Él se
And he
rió
said,
mucho,
"If I ask
se
you for
rió
something, you
mucho
won't come
y se
back."
fue.
He laughed, and he laughed a lot, actually, and then he
Entonces,
left.
más que una persona subordinada o una persona con un determinado menester, se convirtió en un amigo y en un benefactor de esa obra.
And of course, instead of being a subordinate of his or someone that was in need of something, he actually became a benefactor to this grand opus.
Y así nació el proyecto como es ahora.
And that's how the project actually came to its inception as
Se
it is
restauraron
now.
castillos, antiguas iglesias, más de 40 o 50 palacios. Se abrió la arqueología y se crearon medios para dar a conocer el patrimonio cultural. Una emisora de radio propia, estudios televisivos propios, un sistema de publicaciones. Quiere decir, lograr los instrumentos para poder realizar el objetivo.
At that point, many fortresses on the island, over 50 palaces, churches, and all sorts of plazas and arches began to be refurbished. Radio and TV also lent their help to this, and it was all to sort of create the infrastructure that was necessary so that then the information could also be published.
Renuncié hace un año al teléfono celular.
I gave up on using my cell phone about a year ago.
Quiere decir que el que me busca, me encuentra.
That means if you need to find me, you
Y
will
el que
find me.
quiera buscarme, me hallará.
Whoever needs to seek me out will definitely find me.
Ahora soy más libre.
I'm actually free now.
One of the things that I learned from you is that the Spanish-Cuban-American history was more complicated than I thought. And I learned from you that the Cubans fought with the Americans against the British, and that Cuba was a very important part of the Spanish Empire, and much of their Caribbean work was done from Havana, which is why Havana is such a rich place. Tell us a little bit about all of that part of the history.
Cuando se encendía una lámpara con aceite de ballena en el morro de La Habana, los puritanos no habían llegado todavía en su largo viaje. Ahí comienza la historia.
When the very first lamp was filled with whale oil on the streets of Havana, the Puritans hadn't actually reached the United States yet, or America for that matter.
Todo lo que nos rodeaba era España.
Only Spain surrounded us at that point.
Lo era la Florida,
Even so, even Florida was.
el norte inexplorado.
And of course, the North was unexplored.
Había sido recorrido por algunos expedicionarios.
Some expeditionists had already been to those areas.
El río Mississippi fue tan legendario como lo fue el Amazonas
The
o el
Mississippi
Magdalena.
River, the Mississippi River was as legendary as was the Amazon or the Magdalene River.
Cuando La Habana fue tomada por los británicos en 1762,
When
Llegaron-
Havana was taken by the British in 1762,
después de un sitio que duró casi 2 meses,
after a siege that took about 2 months,
llegaron por fin a la ciudad y se apoderaron de ella y establecieron el dominio británico sobre el occidente de Cuba.
they arrived at the capital and they set up what was the British control of the western part of the island.
Entre los primeros oficiales británicos que llegaron a Cuba estaba un joven altísimo, George Washington.
Among those young officials that arrived in Cuba, there was a young man, a very tall young man named George Washington.
Quizás nadie sabía entonces que sería el libertador de Estados Unidos.
Perhaps no one knew at that time that he
El
would
fundador.
eventually become the liberator, the founder of the United States.
Entonces nació una relación,
That's where this relationship
una
actually was
relación
born.
económica muy fuerte
A very strong economic
entre
relationship
Cuba y las colonias.
between Cuba and the colonies.
España además quería vengar la hostilidad británica.
And of course, Spain wanted to avenge this hostility that it had towards Britain.
Y cuando surgió el primer grito en Norteamérica, España lo apoyó.
And when the first cry of independence took place in America, Spain heard it.
Y la primera plataforma para esa ayuda era el puerto de La Habana.
And the very first platform of help for that event to take place was the port of Havana.
Todavía lleva una lápida que dice el puerto de la libertad.
There is still a stone that reads the port of liberty.
Entonces los cubanos llegaron, sus emisarios de La Habana, llegaron al campamento de Washington en Georgetown.
And of course, emissaries from Cuba arrived at George Washington's camp in Georgetown.
Los identificaba algo. Pertenecían todos a una sociedad secreta masónica
He was able to identify them because, of course, they all belonged to the same Masonic society.
que creían en el hombre futuro, que creían en la igualdad de todos los seres humanos, que creían en la fraternidad humana, que todos los hombres nacían iguales.
Who obviously believed in the future, that believed in the brotherhood or camaraderie among human beings, that believed in progress, and believed in the betterment of society.
Entonces, cuando recorro ahora, que he podido hacerlo, la parte sur de los Estados Unidos, he estado, por ejemplo, en San Agustín, en Pensacola, en Mobile, las tumbas en los cementerios me recuerdan a incontables gentes de Cuba.
So, of course, now that I've had a chance to visit the south of the United States, I've been in St. Augustine, I've been in Pensacola and Mobile. I've seen some of the cemeteries, and some of them remind me of those luminaries from Cuba.
Después, cuando Cuba luchó por su libertad, a partir de 1868,
And of course, when Cuba began to fight for its own independence in 1868,
muchos americanos simpatizaron con la causa de Cuba
many Americans actually supported and sympathized the Cuban struggle.
y muchos fueron a luchar por Cuba.
And many of them also went to fight for Cuba.
Esos forman parte de nuestra historia.
And they, too, are part of our history.
Ahí están las claves interpretativas.
those are the most interpretive keys or
Quiere decir, estamos unidos por ciertos lazos,
so of course we are tied because of these
de los cuales
things.
Martí fue el símbolo supremo de esos ideales.
And of course, Martí was the supreme symbol of those ideals.
Su último cumpleaños lo celebró el 28 de enero de 1895 en el restaurante Delmónicos en Nueva York.
And of course, his last birthday was the 28th of January, 1895, in the Delmonico Cafe in New York.
Y poco después desapareció hacia Cuba.
And then after that, he went back to Cuba.
Tenía solamente 42 años.
He was only 42 years of age.
Y como yo decía ayer, su vida fue tan efímera como una mariposa.
And as I mentioned yesterday, his life was as ephemeral as that of a butterfly's.
I have one more question, and then we'll go to audience questions. Today, the links between Cuba and America are being restored. What is your hope for the relations between Cuba and Americans? What would you like to see?
Yo les repito lo que dije antes. Cuba siempre tuvo, tiene y tendrá amigos en los Estados Unidos.
I'd like to repeat something that I mentioned before. Cuba has always had, has, and will always have friends in the United States.
Las batallas políticas no pueden tornarse vulgares. Tienen que ser necesariamente batalla de ideas.
Political battles should never become vulgar. They should only be a battle of ideas.
Yo no puedo creer que podamos estar condenados a una enemistad perpetua.
I cannot believe, nor do I want to believe, that we are doomed to have this enmity among us
Y
forever.
la manifestación más flagrante de esa situación es el bloqueo a Cuba.
And the most flagrant manifestation of that is the constant blockade.
Ahora ese
Of
muro
Cuba.
invisible empieza a derrumbarse.
Now that invisible wall is finally crumbling.
Lo que no se puede permitir es que se vuelvan a cerrar de nuevo con cadenas las brechas.
What we cannot allow to see happen again is that those gaps again are filled with chains that we can
En
no
Cuba
longer
no se
open.
queman banderas norteamericanas en las calles,
We do not burn North American flags in Cuba,
ni se apedrea a los norteamericanos.
and Americans are not stoned.
Nuestra emigración desde siglos está en Estados Unidos.
Our emigration from the country has always been towards the
Me
United
recuerdo
States.
que un senador norteamericano que me visitó hace varios años, uno de los senadores más importantes,
I remember there was a senator that visited me several years ago, actually, one of the most important senators.
después que terminó la conversación, el bloqueo era total.
And of course, after the conversation was over, the blockade was
Me
total
dijo,
at
¿qué
that point.
quiere usted que en mi próxima visita le traiga de los Estados Unidos?
And he said to me, "What is it that you would like for me to bring you from the United States on
Le
my
dije,
next visit?"
¿Sería usted tan generoso de hacerlo?
And I said to him, "Would you be so generous as to be able to accomplish that?"
Entonces le dije, por favor, tráigame una pasta de afeitar de Old Spice.
And I said, "Would you please be able to bring me an oil spice shaving
Y lo
cream?"
más interesante fue que me la trajo.
The most interesting thing is that he actually made
Me la
true on his
trajo.
promise. He
Volvió
brought it for me. He
y me
came
la
back
trajo.
and he brought it
I'm
for
sure
me.
we can buy it around the corner here.
Estoy seguro.
Le agradezco mucho al senador por aquel gesto noble.
I really do appreciate the senator's noble gesture.
Y yo creo que a eso debemos aspirar.
And I believe that that is what we
Hoy
need to
que el
aspire
mundo
to.
está tan enrarecido y tan complicado,
Now that the world is just such a difficult place,
yo pienso más
complicated
que
place,
nunca tenemos que luchar por esa convivencia armoniosa,
I think we need to look for and strive for that harmonious connection between
donde
people,
la fe, la concepción del mundo, las doctrinas sociales no separen, sino unan a los hombres.
where faith and social doctrines do not separate us from each other.
Esa al menos es mi visión.
At least that's my vision.
So with that, do we have some questions from the audience? And please ask them in Spanish if you're a Spanish speaker, and we'll have our translator translate. Who would like to start? Yes.
Pregunten, aprovechen
Yes, sir.
bien.
Go ahead.
Please take advantage of the situation to ask any question.
¿Qué tal? Bienvenido a Google. He estado en Cuba un par de veces recientemente y admiré mucho el trabajo que se ha hecho en restaurar los edificios y los palacios, etc. ¿Cómo ve usted el futuro de esa obra? ¿Se va a poder continuar? ¿Está acelerando? ¿Está al mismo nivel o usted ve problemas en el futuro?
Hay que continuar.
I was recently in Cuba a few weeks ago, and I'd like to ask you a question concerning the restoration of the infrastructure, specifically the buildings. Do you think that that is in the works? Is the work being sped up? How long do you foresee that happening in the near future?
Yo creo que sí, que hay que continuar y se va a continuar. Hace unos días nosotros hemos hecho todo el estudio arqueológico de la vieja ciudad y sabemos dónde están los restos de las antiguas murallas. Lo que ocurre es que donde están las antiguas murallas existen aparcamientos de automóviles, muchos intereses que siempre existen en todas partes del mundo. Entonces, recordando los buenos y mejores tiempos, reuní a mis colaboradores, arquitectos, arqueólogos, etc. y les dije, rompan las calles y ojalá aparezca la muralla. Y como siempre he tenido buena suerte, debajo de las calles rotas aparecieron los restos de las murallas con las piedras caídas y hasta un cañón estaba tirado ahí como regalo a mi imaginación. Entonces, con ese mismo espíritu creativo y venciendo muchas dificultades, fundamentalmente económicas, hay que hacerlo, porque construir es fácil. Restaurar es un menester difícil, arduo y económicamente complejo. Muchos creían que eso saldría de la UNESCO, por ejemplo, pero en realidad la UNESCO es una institución venerable para nosotros, pero lo que me puede ofrecer es un título de conde, pero no me puede de ninguna manera dar dinero. Y yo estoy acostumbrado a que me digan pedirnos hasta la sangre, pero dinero no. Por tanto, el dinero tenemos que crearlo nosotros y lo estamos creando para hacerlo.
It's interesting that you say that. I believe so. I believe so that we will be able to do that. I've recently been studying a lot of the monuments in Cuba, and I've been working with architects and archaeologists. Recently, we've tried to locate the remains of the old city walls. Unfortunately, those remains are now covered by parking lots for buses of all types, tourist buses. At that point, I said, break it all. If you need to open the streets, do so. And I'm the kind of person that's actually been very lucky and fortunate, because every time I crack open the street, I find something below. We did find the remains of the city wall,
Wow.
and we're very happy about that at this moment. And with that same spirit, we hope to pursue other projects. It's very easy to build, but it's very difficult to restore. And unfortunately, we haven't been very lucky in the area, in the economic arena. It's funny, something like UNESCO will grant me a title of account, but they won't allow us to receive the money that we need to do this, to make sure that we can improve upon our national heritage, which is our city. It's easier to get blood than it is to get money in some cases.
Do we have a question here? Yes, sir.
Hola, muchas gracias por venir y compartir su sabiduría. Es un honor. Le voy a hacer una pregunta un poquito incómoda. Este país ha tenido una historia de compañías estadounidenses que han ido a Cuba y a veces han explotado más que ayudado. ¿Y qué nos puede decir a nosotros que somos de esta compañía, de acá? ¿Qué lecciones podemos aprender de la historia para no cometer los mismos errores?
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so very much for your wisdom as well. I'd like to put a rather uncomfortable question to you, if you will. But there's a long history of American companies that have gone to Cuba specifically to exploit its riches. What can you say at the moment about this situation?
Si me preguntaran, diría que si ahora mismo me ofrecen una suma muy importante y me ponen como alternativa este programa, que va a ser tan importante y va a ser tan conocido y va a llegar a tantos en distintos lugares del mundo, escojo el programa. Quiere decir, lo importante es que los momentos cambian, las cosas cambian. Hoy somos más dueños de nuestro destino, de nuestro cielo y de nuestro suelo, y podemos decidir. Hubo un tiempo en que no podíamos decidir. Ahora podemos decidir, y nuestra decisión siempre es qué escoger, qué escoger. Y yo pienso que ante esa alternativa quizás haya una posición que podían llamar, y voy a repetir por segunda vez ese adjetivo, romántica. Las revoluciones no son nada románticas, pero desconfío profundamente de los que no lo sean.
Again, if you ask me this question now, and if I am put to the alternative, knowing full well what's being offered to us, I think the most important thing now is that now we are stewards of our own future. We are stewards of our own sky and our own land in Cuba. And it is up to us now to decide. Perhaps in the past, it would have been more difficult to decide. What to do in this case, what are our choices? The alternative that is before us now is an interesting one. And again, I will say this for a second time. The word romantic, revolutions are not romantic, but I would be hard-pressed to believe that if I saw a revolution that wasn't romantic, I would probably be very doubtful of it.
Yes, sir?
¿Qué piensas son las cosas más importantes que los americanos saber para cambiar las opiniones de Cuba? Sí.
What do you believe is one of the most important things that Americans need to know to change their view on Cuba?
Cuba es un país amistoso. Es un país amistoso y un país hospitalario. Todo el que llega con ese espíritu es bien recibido. Si llegan deportistas y se toca el himno de los Estados Unidos, las personas se ponen de pie con respeto. Si van por las calles, los saludan. No hay nada que decir en este sentido. Como yo te decía, lo más importante es el acercamiento y no la distancia. Venzamos la distancia y los instrumentos de la distancia. ¿Cuáles son? El no poder comerciar, que es un dogma en un país como este. El no poder viajar a Cuba, es el único país del mundo al que no pueden viajar los norteamericanos. Pueden viajar hasta la República Popular Democrática de Corea y no pueden viajar a Cuba. Sin embargo, Cuba está tan cerca, estamos tan unidos por lazos tan intensos, históricos, artísticos, poéticos. Entonces, si eso es así, económicos, pues lo que tenemos que hacer es vencer y romper lo que queda del muro. No se pueden levantar muros. Es el momento de abrir puertas.
The first thing I'd like for you to know is that Cuba is a friendly and hospitable country. We welcome any and all to our country. If there are athletes present and, of course, their national anthem is being played, everyone stands in respect. If you're walking down the street as a tourist, people greet you. The most important thing is that we have different views and different ways of thinking. And, of course, there are certain dogmas that have been imposed, particularly in the realm of economics. The United States is one of the only countries in the world that cannot visit Cuba openly. Its citizens cannot visit Cuba openly. It is easier for you to visit the democratic country of North Korea than it is to visit Cuba. We are tied by historical, poetic, and artistic ties. And that is what we need to focus on. And we need to make sure that we vanquish any sort of separatism on our part. It is time to destroy any kind of wall that we may have built in the past. It is time to unite, and it is time to remember that we are more together than we think.
As a person who's been to North Korea and to Cuba, I can tell you that it's easier to get to North Korea. So the professor is correct. The good news is, if you've not been to Cuba before, it's relatively easy to go under one of 12 categories now, and I would strongly recommend that you visit. Strong recommendation that you visit. Yes, ma'am.
Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Me alegro mucho de verle. Me alegro mucho de la nueva era que parece abrirse para Cuba. Y yo de una nueva era de relaciones entre Cuba y los Estados Unidos, pero allá de eso, una nueva era para Cuba y el mundo. Y yo quisiera saber cuál es su sueño para Cuba ahora y para los años que vienen para reinventarse.
Thank you so very much for being here. I'm so happy about this new era which is being born in Cuba. I'd like to know what you think what is your dream for Cuba at the moment, and particularly for the future?
Cada tiempo trae sus propios desafíos. Lo que hasta ayer fue conveniente, ya hoy no es prudente. Hay que hacer caminos nuevos. Esto creo. La apertura de las relaciones es un acontecimiento importante, carácter histórico. Todavía no se han vencido todas las dificultades para una normalización plena de las relaciones. Hay todavía cuestiones delicadas que discutir, pero considero que estamos en el camino correcto. Considero que además hay un tiempo nuevo para Cuba. El que va a Cuba hoy no verá la misma que vio hace 2 años ni hace 3 años. El ambiente es diferente. La participación ciudadana en esos empeños es muy notable. Yo creo que ese es el futuro. ¿Qué quiero yo? Pues lógicamente, quisiera un futuro de prosperidad para todos, de equidad para todos, donde ni la cuna ni ningún privilegio sea el que determine que una persona pueda llevar una vida digna, donde se limite la angustiosa diferencia que hay siempre entre riqueza y pobreza, que es decir, alcanzar la mayor cantidad de justicia posible. Esa es la idea.
Every single era, of course, poses its own challenges, and sometimes those challenges are not prudent at the moment. And of course, with the opening of the relations between Cuba and the United States, there are many things that still need to be worked out. There are many delicate issues that still need to be talked about. But I believe that we are definitely on the right path. My dream, my wish for Cuba is that Cuba will become more participatory, that its population will be more involved in its future, that there will be more equity, and that there will be more prosperity. Of course, the Cuba of yesteryear, the Cuba from 2-3 years ago will no longer be in existence, that people will be able to have a life full of dignity, that, of course, the difference, the anguishing difference that richness versus poverty poses will also allow people to live a better life, and ultimately that there is more justice for everyone. That is the main goal, and that is the thing that I am dreaming for in Cuba.
Yes, sir. And I think we have one follow, and these will be our last 2 questions. So, yes, sir.
Hola, muchas gracias por venir. Mi pregunta tiene que ver con que uno de los grandes éxitos de la Revolución Cubana fue la enorme alfabetización que logró en la población cubana. Y en el mundo hoy, la educación digital y el acceso a Internet es tan importante para la educación de un montón de chicos. Quiero saber, uno, ¿qué opina de esto? Y lo segundo es cómo podemos hacer, tanto el pueblo cubano como desde Google, para ayudar a que los niños cubanos tengan todavía más acceso a toda la información y todo el contenido que hoy posibilita Internet.
Bueno, creo que... Perdón.
Thank you so very much for coming. I wanted to mention that one of the successes of the Cuban Revolution was the push for literacy in Cuba. And of course, today, the internet is a proponent of this on a world scale. What do you believe is something that we at Google can do to afford the children of Cuba access to information and content to better allow them to get access to a well-rounded education?
Bueno, hasta ahora nos ha sido vedada la banda ancha de Internet, las comunicaciones expeditas. Parte del aislamiento ha sido privarnos de esa posibilidad. Yo creo que el paso de Google al ir a La Habana y demostrar que es posible hacerlo con el respeto al pueblo cubano, hacerlo con acatamiento de las normas vigentes en Cuba, ha sido un paso trascendental. Yo creo que lo que usted me pregunta es objetivamente válido y quisiera responder con el mismo entusiasmo y con la misma alegría con que usted me lo ha presentado. Creo que sí, que es indispensable tener esos instrumentos para el conocimiento actual. Quizás si la obra más importante sea la obra educativa, el capital fundamental de Cuba son sus personas, son su gente, no la posesión de una u otra tecnología, sino lo que se les dio en este sentido. Y lo más importante, la paz social. No vas a encontrar en Cuba ni bandas armadas, no hay secuestro, porque entre otras cosas no hay dinero con que pagar. No hay secuestro. no hay bandas secuestrando a las personas, no hay atentado contra el que llega, contra el que viene, al contrario, hospitalidad, etc. Por eso, bienvenido Google. Creo que haber comenzado permitiendo a los niños de las escuelas ver la vida de José Martí, verla como nunca antes, en un espacio virtual nunca imaginado, es quizás la demostración de buena fe y es un ramo de flores extendido al pueblo de Cuba.
First of all, I'd like to answer your question with the same excitement and respect that you garnered or warranted me. The fact that Google came to Havana and showed its respect by offering to help us with this is something that is of true importance, because we have been denied bandwidth in Cuba for a very long time. And as you mentioned, it is imperative that we do right by our children. In fact, the most important thing that we can do for the Cuban children is to provide them with an equal education. In fact, they are its most important capital. Aside from any type of technology that can be brought to the island, its citizens are actually the ones who are the stewards of the country and the ones that will help us in the future. The idea of social peace in the country is something that we've promoted also. There are no kidnappings in Cuba, because if we were to kidnap someone, there would be no money to pay for the kidnappers, of course. So we would like to also welcome Google again to our coasts, to live out the life that Martí had envisioned through this virtual reality that they so graciously provided us with and that they've created. Thank you very much.
Gracias, doctor. Como un histórico, ¿qué piensa de algo tan moderno como el Internet y los impactos en la sociedad?
Thank you so much, Professor, for being here. As a historian, what do you feel is the impact of the Internet on society?
Bueno, imagínense, mi generación íbamos a una fiesta y llevábamos una grabadora de cinta con la música cargada entre dos.
Well, I'd like to first point out that my generation would bring a cassette recorder to a party, and we had to carry the equipment
Quiero
among two
decir
people.
que fue para mí algo tan sensacional la revolución tecnológica como lo pudo ser en Nueva York del siglo XIX, cuando en medio de la emergencia de una sociedad moderna surgía la radiofonía, el teléfono, la luz eléctrica. Quiere decir, algo deslumbrante. Creo que es importantísimo la posibilidad que da el conocimiento abarcador. Hoy cuando queremos buscar algo, yo mismo le pido a mi asistente, búsqueme Google rápidamente, identifíqueme tal personaje, busque tal cosa. A veces es necesario, como uno es el historiador, pues hacer algunas precisiones, porque quizás la fuente para la información omitió algo que era importante, pero me parece sencillamente sensacional. Es algo sensacional.
Well, I'll start off with the word sensational because it's been a sensational revolution. When I think about the 19th century in New York and everything that happened involving the telephone, the radio, it is awe-inspiring to think that you can look up anything now on the internet. Amazing is the word. It's something that you can look up on Google at any point. In fact, I work very closely with my assistant to look up anything that I need on Google. As a historian, sometimes I need to make sure that I verify a source, or perhaps I've omitted some type of factoid. And it's amazing that today you can do all of this. And we are at the threshold of a new generation.
When the history of Cuba is written and the history of Havana is written, it will be a history of Dr. Leal. Foolishly, with a wheelbarrow, he set out to preserve one of the great things of humanity. I admire him greatly, and I encourage you to spend as much time as you can to study his work, and it's a great honor to welcome you here to Google.
Muchas gracias a usted, presidente. Lo agradezco extraordinariamente desde que nos conocimos. Ha sido una admiración recíproca. También lo es para mí poderlo encontrar aquí en su casa con sus colaboradores. Ha sido para mí un gran honor y no sé, no he pensado nunca en qué recuerdo tendrá de mí la posteridad. los que como yo estamos acostumbrados a recorrer lápidas antiguas, viejos cementerios, antiguos monumentos, y leemos siempre los juramentos de nunca te olvidaremos, siempre estaremos junto a ti. Por tanto, eso no me preocupa tanto. Lo que me preocupa es lo que se quedó por hacer. Siempre dije que me gustaría tener una otra vida y suplicaba por tener otra y poderla consagrar a lo mismo. Y sobre todo, si volviera a vivir y me preguntaran qué quisiera hacer o dónde quisiera nacer, no vacilaría ni un momento. Recorrería el mismo camino y nacería en la misma tierra, Cuba.
Thank you. First of all, sir, thank you so much for opening your doors here at home to me. And it's amazing because ever since we met, I believe that our admiration was always reciprocated. It's been a great honor for me to come here to visit you in your very own headquarters. And interestingly enough, I've never really thought about what sort of memory will be held about me or have had about me in posterity in the future. I've always liked to walk around old cemeteries and read all of the inscriptions. We'll never forget you. It's interesting because I've never really thought about this, but as I think about my own life, I think that the most important thing is what I haven't accomplished in life, what has yet to be done. And I've always said, I wish I could live once again. I could have one more life, and I'd do it all over again. I'd do exactly what I did before, and I would dedicate it to the very same ideals. And of course, I would choose to be born in the same land, the very same land in which I was born, Cuba. So thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you, Dr. Leal. Thank you very much.